The selling of the Trump administration story about the war in Iran, it might be harder than ever, both at home and abroad, thanks to Kari Lake. That is, unless a federal judge in D.C. gets his way, or because Judge Royce Lamberth just ruled that Kari Lake's leadership at the U.S. Agency for Global Media is unlawful. And with this ruling, Lamberth's invalidated everything that Lake's done during her time, including laying off hundreds of people and the cuts to broadcasters both here in the States and around the world. And so now one of the biggest questions is whether this ruling's actually going to stick. But also, before we look ahead, we need to back up a bit, because the U.S. Agency for Global Media is the umbrella for many news outlets, including Voice of America. And that actually began broadcasting back in 1942 during World War II to combat Nazi and Japanese propaganda. Right? And also included Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, which kicked off in the 50s as a part of a CIA-backed initiative to stir up dissent against communism in the Soviet Union. Though also the CIA reportedly stopped being involved in the 70s. There's also Radio and Television Martí, a network established in 1983 to break through Cuban censorship, and Radio Free Asia, aimed at a response to the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre in Beijing. And then there's the Middle Eastern broadcasting networks, which were created in 2004. And that notably includes Radio Farda as the Iranian branch. Right, in all of these, they're fully funded by the USAGM, delivering the news in dozens of languages and reaching hundreds of millions of people around the world. And, they brought news to places with incredibly limited press freedoms. And despite, how they started, they had full editorial independence for decades. The agency's charter requires journalists to deliver actual news and information rather than just being a government mouthpiece. And you had the so-called firewall, referring to policies that insulate them, their content, and their staff from political influence. But that firewall, it came under attack during Trump's first administration, with Trump's handpicked leader doing his best to chip away at the agency's editorial independence by punishing journalists who wouldn't fall in line to back Trump. A move that naturally led to some lengthy court battles and eventually a federal inquiry that found Trump's handpicked leader had, at least in some cases, violated the law. And I guess because history and the Trump administration repeat itself, we're back to the same place again, though this time with Kari Lake as Trump's chosen. Right, and Kari Lake, she's a former television anchor who unsuccessfully ran for both a U.S. Senate seat and for governor in Arizona. She is very much a die-hard Trump believer, and because Trump rewards loyalty like that, Trump placed her in charge of the USAGM when he came back into office, and he charged her with bringing it down. Right, a year ago, he issued an executive order demanding the drawdown of the agency, which prompted Lake to put most staffers on administrative leave and cut hundreds of contractors. And so that, along with other actions, it led to her largely dismantling Voice of America, which has then in turn led to several legal challenges and even defeats for the Trump administration. In fact, Judge Lamberth's ruling, it came from a case brought against Lake and the USAGM by several employees who were laid off, including Voice of America's White House bureau chief and other journalists. And you had a statement from the plaintiffs reading, "The judge's ruling that Kari Lake's action shall have no force or effect is a powerful step toward undoing the damage she has inflicted on this American institution that we love." And adding, even as we work through what this ruling means for colleagues harmed by her actions, it brings renewed hope and momentum to the next phase of our fight, restoring VOA's global operations and ensuring we continue to produce journalism, not propaganda. Now with this, an important thing to note is that Lake does not technically hold the position of CEO of USAGM, which is the part that requires congressional approval. Technically, she was named senior advisor to acting chief executive Victor Morales, who then delegated his authorities to her, though she has also repeatedly referred to herself as acting CEO or deputy CEO, which has led to some confusion about what title she actually has. But that also wasn't enough for Lamberth. He rejected the argument, saying, quote, "Allowing the president to circumvent Congress's carefully crafted limitations through delegations would violate the spirit of the Constitution." Now, as you can imagine, Lake was not exactly thrilled with Lamberth's ruling, saying in her response, "The American people gave President Trump a mandate to cut bloated bureaucracy, eliminate waste, and restore accountability to government," and saying an activist judge is trying to stand in the way of those efforts at USAGM. "We strongly disagree with this decision and will appeal." And so now it's just a matter of, whether or not this is going to live through the appeals process, especially if it makes it all the way to the top. But if it is upheld, it would allow more than 1,000 journalists and support staff members to go back to their jobs. But then also another question is what exactly Kari's going to be doing from now to whenever this gets resolved, and if not her, who's going to be in charge? And with that, we might actually get an answer later this week, with Lamberth requesting the government provide clarity on who the acting CEO actually is by March 11th, as well as provide a succession plan for the position.